Hey everyone, this is Captain Brian Brown with FishingHype.com, Fishing Hype Guide Service, and I'm here with your Kentucky Lake Tip of the Week, and it has to do with fishing line. You go to some of these stores, they'll just have gobs of choices. I mean, a whole wall selection of fishing line choices, and I am going to try to narrow it down as to what to use when and what I prefer to use for different techniques and situations. And with that, I'm a Sunline guy. So everything I have, I'm gonna be showing you is gonna be Sunline, but there's many different brands out there that all have a mono or copolymer and a fluorocarbon and a braided type fishing line. I'm gonna start with your monos. Your mono line or your copolymers. It's a nylon mono, just being one resin made into a fishing line. Copolymer is two resins brought together. Still a nylon line. Has lots of stretch, will float. This is what everybody almost always uses. It's probably the easiest handling line out there, and it's probably the most popular. It's been around the longest. The more technical you get with it, the nylon line with it floating, guys don't like to use it when they need to get a bait down deep, crankbait fishing, a jig fishing, worm fishing, stuff like that on the bottom. And what I have kind of limited down to my mono and copolymer fishing now is basically bluegill and crappie fishing, your pan fishing type stuff. And then when it comes to my bass fishing, basically just shallow cranking, like square bills, and that's about it for the most part when it comes to what I use my monos for. And the reason I use it for a square bill or shallow cranking, one, it floats, and when I'm square billing or shallow water fishing going down a bank, I want to be able to, if I hit a limb or something, I want to be able to stop it, let that bait float back up, and let that line will help float back up with it and go. It'll also give a little stretch. You're going down the bank, and a lot of times in the spring, and you catch one on a square bill, they don't tend to hit it on the end of a cast. They always wind up hitting it at the end of the boat. They're not real active, so they'll follow a bait a long ways, and they'll get it almost next to the boat. If you're using a braided or a fluorocarbon, which don't have as much stretch, a lot of times I wind up having a fish pull off because they hit it right there, and you react, and the next thing you don't have enough stretch in between all of that, between the rod and the line and everything, and that fish pulls off. So I like the monos and the copolymers. One, they're a little bit easier to use. They're less expensive, especially on the crappie and pan fishing, where a lot of the baits, I'm getting a lot of line twist and stuff anyhow, just because of the baits that you use. So it's inexpensive to re-spool it all the time. And then when I do my shallow water cranking, just for the simple fact, especially around wood and rock and whatever. And a lot of times what will happen, that square bill will come up and hits a log or a rock, and you're still kind of pulling on it. That line will give a bit, kind of stretch, and that bait comes off there, and with that little bit of stretch in the line, it gives it some even better action as it stretches, and then all of a sudden you kind of get that rubber band effect where it wants to snap and go, and it'll give you a little bit better presentation and a little bit more action to the bait. But that's where I go with the monos. I don't use a lot of it anymore. Like I said, back to the pan fishing and then my shallow water cranking. Another one of the lines that have come out and has been around now for a while, and they keep tinkering with it. The first stuff that came out was it wasn't very manageable. The one thing with the with the copolymer and monos, they do have line memory, meaning when you peel it off, it'll have a lot of coil, and you can see this coil. But you can take it, stretch it out, and it'll start losing it. With the monos and copolymers, it'll wind up staying pretty coiled up, and that's where you get some of your line twist. The fluorocarbons are quite a bit better with not having as much memory, which in turn, especially throwing like a bait caster, it will stay a lot straighter and give you a lot better presentation. You won't have that line coil going out there. Now, I don't recommend using very high line poundage with the fluorocarbon when it comes to fishing a spinning reel, because it doesn't have the memory. So when you go to cast, it wants to fly off the reel, and that's where people had problems, 8, 9, 10 years ago when fluorocarbons first started coming out. They were putting it on their spinning rods and just having it spray off. But the two biggest characteristics of the fluorocarbons: one, it sinks, has less stretch, so it's more sensitive, and it is abrasion resistant. It will nick up, but it'll hold its strength, where the nylon, the copolymers and stuff won't hold its strength. I use this probably 90% of my fishing time. Deep cranking, it doesn't have as much stretch, plus the sinks, so you can get a bait down there deeper, and that's the whole key to deep crankbait, is to get it as deep as you can go. So you can get by with a little thinner line. It doesn't have the stretch, and it sinks, so you're going to get a bait down there farther. It's more sensitive, so that's where I'm going to use it for my, my feeling type baits. Your shaky heads, your jig worms, your Texas rigs, your Carolina rigs, any structure oriented on the bottom type bait. That is where I want to throw this. Not only with your crankbaits, again, for getting it down deep, but your swim baits, your big spinner baits, your spoons, anything like that. That a bait you want to get it down on the bottom and keep it down there. You want the sensitivity, and you want a little less stretch. That's where your fluorocarbons are going to come into effect, and they make them in all the right, different sizes, anywhere from 6 pound all the way up to 25. In fact, I even now, when I'm flipping around wood, I will go with a 20 or 25 pound fluorocarbon versus going with the braided line we'll talk about in a minute, for the simple fact that when I pitch a jig or whatever, a tube, whatever it is I'm pitching into wood, the braid is so much more sensitive because it has no stretch, that you tend to want to set the hook more and get hung up. And it also will happen, this won't dig itself into the wood as much as like the braid will. So you're not, when you're sawing a bait up and down, or you got a fish on, you're fighting it out of the wood, it won't dig itself in there quite as bad as the braid will. So 90% of my fishing now is done with a fluorocarbon line. This is Sniper. I mean, they make different little models that they've come out with for. They've got a structure for doing your worm fishing and bottom type fishing, and they've got a reaction for jerk baits and stuff like that. So there's different ones that are out there, specific, trying to get them specified for specific lure presentations. The other line that's out there and became popular, quite a while ago also, is your braided lines. I've got 3 different ways that I'll use this now. I use a lot of it as leader material when I throw a spinning rod, or as my main line on a spinning rod, because of the fact this doesn't have any memory. You showed you how you get a little bit of a coil off the fluorocarbon and whatnot. And you got a lot of twist on the copolymers. Your braids don't. It'll just, you pull that off, it's just going to lay straight, and that's awesome for spinning reels, because everybody knows the problems they've had with spinning reels and line twist and everything else. So that's what I wind up doing, and I'll use this as my main line, and then I'll use anywhere from a 3 foot to maybe a 8 foot leader of either copolymer or fluorocarbon on my spinning rods. I also use this when I throw, it's become a big deal on topwater baits now, with these guys throwing bigger and bigger topwater baits. That's where this has come in with that too. You throw these big spooks and you're trying to throw them out there a long ways, and you get a fish on the end of a really long cast. If you're throwing mono, it's got so much stretch, they're losing fish because of the hookups. This here is really taking care of that. And then the other spot I'm going to use this is when I'm flipping. Anytime I fish around vegetation, period, I'm going to use this. You either flipping it, you're throwing a frog on it, whatever you're doing, this will cut through all that. Those of you who have used this, you set the hook on it, and that fish takes off to the side or something, you can just see it just cut the grass or whatever off, and that's where this will come in. If you use a fluorocarbon or a mono or a copolymer trying to do that, what'll happen, that fish will go and it'll kind of hang up, and he'll get wrapped around it, and you're pulling on him, and it won't cut through it like this will, because this has no stretch. So as you're pulling, he's pulling, and it's really tightening down on that grass, or if he's just cutting a straight line across, it'll tear that grass right up. and that is, if you're fishing grass, this is a must. I don't care how clear the water is, this is definitely a must. So your braided lines, grass, topwater baits, and good main line for your spinning rods. Fluorocarbons, anytime you're trying to get down there really, really deep, your crankbaits, any bottom contact baits, worms, jigs, Carolina rigs, whatever it may be, and then also your spoons and your swim baits that you're trying to get down deep. And then really clear water. You know, I mean, a lot of drop shot and that sort of thing, which is obviously bottom contact too. But if you got really clear water, this is a great one that reflects sunlight. Your copolymers and monos. Anytime I'm using, usually a spinning rod and doing light, lightweight, 4, 6, 8 pound test, that's where this will come in. And some top water. If I'm using like a popper or something small, I'll go with this because it floats. But other than that, those are pretty much your 3 line choices out there. In each of those categories, they will have, technique specific type lines that are fine, but it's still, you're still got the base of a copolymer or a mono line. You've got the fluorocarbon line or the braided. So hopefully that'll give you a little help on trying to narrow down your search when you're out there at the store and trying to figure out what fishing lines you want to buy. So until next time, tight lines. This is Captain Brian Brown with FishingHype.com, Fishing Hype Guide Service, and this is your Kentucky Lake Tip of the Week.